Being drowned out in a gaming industry where shooters are the bait, hook, and bobber, it's not often that we get to experience a AAA melee combat based game. And when we do, they rarely ever disappoint. For the melee based games out there, a lot of them are made for a niche audience, with the challenge being the focal point versus just a fun, explorative, and at times intense fighting game. Sucker Punch Productions has a new 2020 fix for that in Ghost of Tsushima, a third-person action-adventure samurai game set in the year of 1274. Led by the fictitious leader of Kuta Khan, the Mongolian Empire has decided it would be a great idea to infiltrate the island of Tsushima and let it be the catalyst to overtaking Japan as a whole. And while a lot of the story is loosely based, a lot of the gameplay is more correct than one would believe for a war game set in that time, especially with no real magic of any sort involved, which to me adds such a more fulfilling experience to the game when the historical knowledge is understood and accurate and based on some realities. It should be noted that what this game tells you the Mongols did with the real life invasion is simply a PG friendly storytelling of the actual events, and in this game we see just how ruthless the Mongols are. So cutting them down in this game is very satisfying, not just because of the combat system within the game, but knowing that in real life they were some of the most ruthless warmongers in history, and this game in no way truly conveys that. They were rumored to eat humans, they were rumored to drink blood and string dead, nude bodies on their ships as trophies. You can see when people refer to them just how monstrous they would have had to have been. One of the most fulfilling things about this game is that a lot of the combat mechanics and weapons you can use are really an introductory to samurais in the real life invasion where these tactics were used. So they were forced to adapt, and we see this in the game. For instance, hand-thrown explosives were really in their beginning stages and only started to be used around this time, at least in the China, Korea areas and the surrounding areas there. Modern-day smoke bombs obviously wouldn't be invented for another couple hundred years, but explosive combat, no pun intended there, was definitely a surprise to the Japanese fighters who had not seen enemy tactics like these of Mongolia and the other countries that they had overtook due to fighting. From the start of the game, you will see how brutal the melee sword combat in this game can be. Bodies will eventually pile up. Blood will be spilt by the gallon. And there will be some badass sword fights. And your horse, unfortunately for you, it can kill you. So an ally is kind of working for the enemy, but they are fighting wars against their own volition, so it's understood. I've played my fair share of sword games in the past, some on the harder end and some on the hack and slash arcade-ish type end, and Ghost of Tsushima does what those games I feel couldn't do. With those other games, on one end, you can either cause so much havoc, nothing can stand in your way and you're a god, or on the counter to that, you're clamoring for any little health you can and rolling away from the boss, having a tickling contest with him until he eventually realizes, oh no, I have no health left. One sword slash and I'm dead. And don't get me wrong, tickle fights are fun, but in that game, the fun isn't paramount. You're forced to try to stay alive. That is your mission objective all throughout the game. Ghost of Tsushima, the game can be challenging, but it is also fun and can be approached from so many ways. With this game, you get an abundance of tools in your kit of weapons to cause destruction all across Tsushima Island to end the Mongol invasion and bring peace. And relative to what I was saying earlier, a lot of the weapons you're given, at least explosive-wise, are true to what would have been used at these times during this war. And maybe not on the Japanese end, since in real life they were overwhelmed, their horses were spooked, and the enemy just straight out flanked them from positions that it's kind of like the scene in Gladiator, the movie from 2000 at the beginning, when you see their shields, their tactics with their swords, their spears. That's sort of how the Mongols were to the Japanese. They had never seen tactics like these before, and so it was completely new to them. But like anything, war is about adapting. Whether you want to enter a fight from stealth and continue until you're spotted, or just lure out the remaining enemies with sound distractions to even assassinate the remaining enemies. You can even duel the enemies to dwindle their numbers down to be more reasonable ones in your favor. If you want, and your heart desires it, you can go in with swords blazing and melt every enemy in your path. With black powder bombs, smoke bombs, and assassinations to complement those, you can throw some kunai on the enemy and stun them. Sometimes it one hit kills them and bring out your inner Genji when they do some real damage. Unlike when I'm playing Overwatch with the people on my team. Also, yes, I'm aware there's a difference between Ninja Star and a kunai, but that is beside the point. The combat by and far in this game is honestly the most fun I've had in a very, very long time. I feel like we're so used to using guns in games and just shooting anything that moves that when you actually have a true weapon wheel with variety, it adds such a fun factor to the game. No matter how you approach it, there are dozens of ways to, and each one is just as fun as the other. And going forward, I feel like games should take notice and emphasize secondary ways to kill. Because in this game, while there is a primary way, the ultimate way to kill isn't one prescribed by the developers, but instead whatever you feel like doing for this given fight. You can kill this guy with a sword, kill this guy with a sticky bomb, throw 3 kunai at these incoming enemies, lose the aggro, get back stealth, and then finish off the 3 remaining guys with an in-game assassination. This is one of the most fun combat systems I have ever played. Sticking to that, since it's an open world game, there are lots of fights. And for an open world game to even be considered decent, in my opinion, it has to have an abundance of things to do. But like always, it also has to have a balance between those and not feeling repetitive like you've done them for the millionth time. And for the most part, the things you can do in Ghost of Tsushima, be a bamboo strike to build your resolved, which in this game are like health kits, to even hot springs to soak in and think about your uncle in some weird way to increase your health. Obviously, Viagra wasn't available in the 1200s. To even fox dens, which just increase your charm power. Then there's haikus, which you can compose in fabulously crafted poems. All of these things keep that balance. But I will be the first to admit in the latter part of the game, and by latter I mean the third island, and without spoilers, when you get to the third island, there isn't much story left. 3 or 4 story missions remain when you're at that point. So when they seem like there's a lot of them, you're pretty much at the point to where you would start the cleanup process in the open world anyway. It doesn't interfere with the experience up to that point in any way. And I think a lot of open world fans will feel the same way. If you're not used to open world games, I could easily see how this would be jarring for you. Another great thing for me was that I knew each one would help me further in combat in some way. And if you're playing on a higher difficulty, these things are welcome for sure to help you in any little way you can. If you're playing on lower difficulties, I can see how you would say that these are repetitive, but definitely resolve bamboo strikes. They are paramount to you staying alive. They are paramount to you surviving certain situations. Unlike some open world games with pointless collectibles that's just there as a filler, these actually benefit you in real time. When you surround yourself in this game, you'll see one of the most beautiful worlds ever created. And graphically, I'd compare it to The Last of Us Part 2. But when I go back to The Last of Us Part 2 and I look at the gameplay of that, I see that the worlds are just faded. The colors are faded. When you see Ghost of Tsushima and the environments within, you will truly appreciate scenery in a game that has set a new standard for any new games to be compared to. It easily became my favorite environment in any game I have ever played. Whether you're in the snowlands, in the swamps surrounded by water and flowers, or even the jungle surrounded by bamboo to where it feels like you're running a maze to get to the point you're trying to. The world and beauty in this game is uncontested. But what this game does differently and better than most open world quest based games is make the side quests belong in the game. I will say that clearly they were written with the story in mind, since you're forced to do certain things to advance, but they still feel like their own story. Each individual side quest truly ties into the main story in some way, and I was always eager to complete the next one because I wanted to know how their stories ended. And without giving obvious spoilers, I loved every single side quest except for the ending quest with Lady Masako. I just felt like how it ended just made no sense whatsoever given the context. But even with that said, still makes me believe that it is some of the best side mission, main mission combo quests in any open world game I've ever played. When an open world game starts to feel tiring, it's when there are pointless fetch quests scattered across the map. This game doesn't have those. Don't get me wrong. There are side quests in this game to where some would argue they are fetch quests. There's only a handful of those, and you could probably use both of your hands, given you have all 10 fingers, and count them. And even with all the quests in the menu UI itself is still perfectly crafted. But on the same front with quests, the opening in this game is one of the most jaw-dropping ones for a multitude of reasons, and really gives you the idea of what story to expect, the narrative, and the motion you will endure throughout. It never really escapes you, and I say that in the most endearing way possible. A good story is told by how eager you are to know what happens next, and it speaks volumes to the writing that whether it is a side quest or a main quest or even some random non-integral quest you will do, each one has you anxious to complete it just to be able to do the next thing. And for some games that is bad, but this one it's bittersweet because you want to finish things because it's addicting, but going slowly also extends how much you get to experience this wonderful game. There are so many fun things that you want to do next that you have to choose. And when I finished the game, it already had 50 hours in it, and it just went by super fast. The last game to where I had that many hours in it without realizing it was The Witcher 3 and Horizon Zero Dawn. And that is very great company to be in. Diving more deeply into the story, Kuda Khan, who was introduced as the villain almost immediately, makes his presence known as what I would consider one of the best written villains. In video games, if you have an absolutely hated villain, you clearly wrote him or her to be that way, and most likely gave them a lot of screen time to set it up with their actions being the very reason for that. Instead here, it's inaction which causes you to develop a dislike for Kuda Khan. Since you rarely ever see the antagonist in Ghost of Tsushima, you just see the reflection of him through facets of men and his army, and you see how savage they can be. And you say to yourself, since these are soldiers of his and they are this ruthless, you can only imagine how much turmoil he himself can cause. You build a hate for someone you never even really see. But with that said, a lot of times the villain didn't even matter. It was the people of Tsushima you were playing the game for to help them. Playing the game for to help them keep their island from being taken over. It was the Mongol soldiers themselves you were playing against to defeat. So you had all of these forces to the Khan himself that you didn't care much for him, but you still knew when the time came something needed to be done. My two favorite characters in this game ended up being Norio, who I connected with personally, and his quest line was easily my favorite of all of the side quests the game had to offer. Counter to that, who didn't have a real major part in the game, and I think everyone still loved honestly. Anytime Kenji was on the screen, I honestly laughed because I knew that there was about to be some lighthearted comic relief, and it made you forget about the brutal world you're playing in. And even if it wasn't needed at times, it was still a welcome surprise to have someone like that character be in the game. I love the story for many reasons. I feel like I was helping the island. I felt like I was helping all of my friends with their battles, both physical and within, and likewise Jin himself was fighting his own battles. But the story of this game proved that perseverance and adaptation is paramount to obstacles being overcome. It is one of the best meticulously crafted stories I've ever played. When I say every single character and the story in this game is as perfect as it can be, I honestly mean that in every sense. All in all, we don't get many samurai games today. And honestly, given Sucker Punch's recent games like Infamous, which I love, I didn't expect them to deliver so well with Ghost of Tsushima. A game that is 180 from the genres they know. They make fantastic open world games. But for this to be their true deviation from what they know, they delivered time after time on so many levels in this game. And Ghost of Tsushima has become one of, if not my favorite game of all time. It is by and far my most favorite open world game. The story, the combat system, the activities to do make this a masterpiece to remember, and any sequel for it is now my most anticipated game. It is 100% the game that should close a generation for PlayStation 4, and I easily give this game a 9.5.